Thought I'd post up an update on my Samurai. Pulling the front end apart. I've been having problems with the front lock right. When I get it out and pull it apart, I'll show why. It's not really the lock right's fault. But anyway, I've been tired of the lock right. Anyway, I'd like to switch to selectable lockers. And the timing actually worked out really well. This last trip, they began popping and skipping real bad again. And about the same time, I got a message from Tony from Zepka Customs. He's the US distributor for TRE4x4 parts. They sell air and electric operated lockers for tons of different vehicles. But he offered to sponsor me and supplied me with one of their e-lockers. So I'm gonna put this in the front. Super simple, so I'm really excited about. I mean, literally, you supply it power and ground, it locks. It just uses an electromagnet, which is this top section. And then as it's spinning, once the magnet's engaged, it creates friction here, and it holds this top piece from rotating as this piece continues to rotate. And so this angle here, it's like a cam, and it forces these pins down. There's 4 of these pins around the differential, and those pins go down, and in this lower section is a coupler that locks. It's basically got internal and external splines that lock the bottom side gear to the case, locking the differential. Very simple, seems pretty foolproof. I mean, electromagnets have been around for 100 plus years. Super reliable, super simple. So this one is this part number here, the TE204. It's actually a sidekick rear, early version with the 10 ring gear bolts, which is what I've got in the front of my front axle, my front hybrid axle. So I'm gonna give this a try. Hopefully I love it, and I really would like to put one in the rear as well. I race my Samurai occasionally, but most of the time I play with it in the sand dunes. And you can see here, these are hiding behind all the steel. These are my sand tires. And it actually works really good with these. And I love to have turning brakes, because that's one thing that it doesn't do really great. It doesn't steer super hard. So with a selectable locker, I could run turning brakes, and that would be awesome. So anyway, I'm gonna keep the Samurai outside right now. Luckily, I've got a covered little porch area behind my shop. So anyway, pulling this all apart. Get the third member out. Kind of give everything a once over. It's been a little while since I've had this front end apart. Check all the kingpin bearings and seals and everything else. I mean, so far it's been holding up good, besides the lock right issues. The main issue with the lock right is that third member was really put together of a bunch of junk I had laying around. And the case, the carrier case, I did not have complete. So I didn't have the side gears and thrust washers and all that stuff that came from the factory together. And that's actually pretty important for a lock right, is you need the thrust washers that were fit for that carrier, because everything's, every carrier is a little different. And those thrust washers come in various thicknesses to basically set up the spider gears and the side gears to mesh correctly. And if you don't have that, the lock right can have issues, and that's been my problem. And I've pulled it apart a couple times, but it's not an easy thing with the equipment I have to measure and try to get those clearances right. Because basically you're trying to get the side gears spaced perfectly from the cross pins, evenly from the cross pins. And I haven't been able to figure out a way to measure that really well. I've messed with it a couple times, and honestly, I'm just over it. The e-locker is gonna be so much better. So hopefully I'm gonna get this done, and working on sway bar and a couple other things, trying to get this ready for either King of the Hammers coming up here this next year, or I don't know, not sure, possibly some other race, as well as other things. I'm gonna try to hit the Rubicon Trail again soon. I'd like to go try some other places out, so gotta get this thing straightened away. So I'm gonna get to work, and I will come back when I've got the third member out, and I can kind of show what's going on in there and start setting up that e-locker. One more quick thing I wanted to point out is if you get rid of the dust shield, that's normally here, that sits behind the brake disc. If you get rid of that, then it clears up access more easily to these bolts here, and then you can pull this whole spindle snout and bearing hub assembly all in one piece when you're doing work to the third member or something. So you can pull this all apart and not have to play with the bearings. It all stays assembled. You don't have to get all greasy or play with resetting up the preload. It just stays all in one piece. And then you just gotta pull the knuckles like normal, slide the axles out. Saves quite a bit of time, and makes the job a lot cleaner and easier. I just put these in a bag to keep them clean, so I don't even have to touch them, put them back together. Okay, so here's the third member out of the rig. I've already pulled the caps. Since I'm changing the carrier, there's no sense in really keeping track of, you know, where this is at. If you're just doing a simple lock right, you can mark these. I usually will take a paint pen and mark them, and then turn it one turn loose. And the same thing on this side, one turn loose or counterclockwise. And that gives you room to get this in and out. And then I usually will, it's easier with two people, hold these spanner nuts in as you pull the carrier out so nothing moves. And then when you install the lock right and put it all back together and drop it in, you can turn it your one turn and you'll be right back to where it was. But since in this case I'm changing the carrier, even the slightest difference in dimension from here to where the bearing sits, you know, will affect the pattern as well as bearing preload. So these I just loosened up because I'm not trying to keep track. So I'll just back these off, and in fact, you can just take them off. And then if you haven't done this before, it's important to mark and keep track of these caps. They have to stay where they came from. You know, these you can't turn them around backwards, but you know, if you were to put it on the wrong side, the threads wouldn't line up, and the bores may not be perfectly aligned. So you paint pen, or like a lot of people will do like one center punch, and then two center punches and two center punches kind of thing. It's a pretty good way of doing it. So I'm gonna get this the rest of the way pulled out. I'm gonna pull the ring gear off, and I'm gonna open this up just to see the amount of metal that came out of this. I'm pretty sure the dowels in the Lockrite are broken again. Another thing, bearing race is very important. Keep them with the bearing, but I'm gonna be putting new bearings on, so it doesn't matter in this case again. All right, well, I'll come back when I've got this all shredded apart and see what's broken in the Lockrite. I don't have a tripod right now, so I can't really film while I'm working. So I'll be back. So I got the cap off this thing, and here you can see, like I was saying before, that this thing's a bunch of junk. This case is a slightly newer Sidekick 12-bolt ring gear case, and then the top plate is a 10-bolt plate to match the 10-bolt ring gear. So I actually put these together, and I think 2 bolts lined up, and I bolted it together and then used the drill press to drill out the other holes, because I couldn't find the parts I needed locally or in my time frame. So I put together the junk I had, and it's, other than the Lockrite issues, I haven't had any problems. Oh, by the way, I found a tripod. So anyway, pull this Lockrite apart and see what we find in here. Actually, none of the pins look broken. That's interesting. Last time I took this apart with the same issue, I had, I believe, 2 broken pins. Sometimes the springs can also get smashed. And maybe I caught this one in time. Okay, it does have, so these have nesting springs, one inside the other. One of them, this spring is mangled. This is kind of a terrible design on the Lockrites. I think the Spartans are actually better. But the spring sits down in the odd round hole. You know, down at the bottom it's got just a cylindrical hole. And then the pin from the opposite side carrier pushes on that spring and has room to move. And so that tweaks the springs back and forth. And they can get smashed, and anyway. Everything still looks fine. It's reusable. You can buy spring and pin kits, and I have a bunch of them. When I buy them, I usually get a couple at a time. But all this nonsense is definitely gonna go away and be nice having this guy instead. I'm just tired of playing with these Lockrights. The one nice thing about the Lockrights is once you're up in a trail, you just don't have to think about them. They're always on, you know, they're always working, and you know, I've never had any problems with, you know, not being able to steer, or a lot of these kind of wives' tales you hear about front lockers. If you have good power steering, and Lockright is functioning to where it unlocks the outside wheel in the corner, like, you can steer fine. I've had this thing in the rocks, I've had it on dirt, you know, sand, obviously. The only place I haven't had it really is in the snow. I tried last winter, but I just ran out of time. I was trying to build a back window and try to come up with some kind of defrost. So that's a project for this upcoming winter. So anyway, I'm gonna package all this stuff up because I don't need it anymore, and then I'm gonna get the ring gear cleaned up, get that all cleaned up, and get the holes clean of any old Loctite, get it all degreased, and inspect it real well, make sure there's no chips or anything damage on the gears from the metal that came out. It wasn't a ton of metal, but enough to kind of raise some concerns, but I'm gonna give that a real good inspection. And then next, I believe there's a snap ring I have to pull off, get this magnet off for the ring gear to be bolted on. So I'm gonna check that out. I have to download the instructions, I haven't done that yet. So I'll come back and let you know what you gotta do. Okay, so yeah, there's this cool spiral style snap ring. You pop out of there, and then the whole magnet assembly comes off. So this is the electromagnet. And then it's, with this off, you can kind of get a better idea how this thing works. So as the magnet energizes and creates some drag on that surface, as the carrier, you know, this piece engages with the carrier, so it does not, you know, rotate freely. It rotates with the carrier. So these just wedge apart. And as they do that, they push down on those pins, and then down inside is the coupler that engages with which would be in the bottom side gear, the way this is sitting. So it's got an internal and external spline, more or less, and it locks that side gear to the carrier case. And then if one gear can't rotate, in effect, none of them can rotate, and it becomes solid inside. So I'm gonna get everything all cleaned up and get the ring gear installed. Be right back. So real quick, one thing I'm looking at, it's hard to tell, but this surface has been surface ground on some sort of rotary fixture, not just spun on a lathe. And it is super smooth and nice. I mean, I know this is an old beat up case, but it's 25 years old, but I mean, this was just turned on a lathe, it looks like. I'm sure, you know, to high standards, but this thing, I've rubbed my hands all over everything, every surface, and there aren't any ugly burrs or any sloppy machining. You know, I've talked to several people that have these, and they've had great luck with them. I haven't heard anybody that's broken one or had any problems whatsoever. And still, just to, you know, it's not an ARB, it's not a Detroit or something, but it is, in my opinion, just as nice as anything else I've ever installed.